Continuation of the same subject. Seventh title and contemplation. It is not so much nature that brings us to love you, my love and my life, nor even the works of grace in us as for us, but it is you yourself, your goodness and your love, which, infinitely above all this effective flow, forces us and lovingly constrains us to love you strongly and freely. It is true that that is not so for men, so base and material as they are, until they may be sufficiently touched, drawn, penetrated, elevated, enraptured, and stretched, lost and become the same love, by the game and flow of the same love, entirely overflowing in them for this effect. For it is true, my dear life, that the poor man who, of himself, knows not and does nothing but slither on the earth, is also only within matter, making good use of your grace sufficient to know and desire you, in conformity with the natural inclination that he is toward you. This one man applies his liberty and free will to knowing you, even already from a distance through your most basic works and manifestations, that is in the order and harmony of nature in itself and in all its perfections and properties that make order, harmony, and an admirable concert in all the elements. All that, I say, serves as a ladder for man to climb to knowledge of you, in conformity to his capacity, climbing as from rung to this knowledge and reasoning thus from one knowledge to another. He climbs to you as he can, coming to know you as through an obscure cloud. This knowledge nonetheless gets a taste of it and gives him some satisfaction in conformity with his disposition and capacity. But as this whole negotiation is more of nature than of grace, it also happens that he does not advance or perfect himself much other than in the nature only of the man who does it. But I leave aside at present all this eminent explanation as not being pertinent to my goal here, since, I say, my love and my life, it is between your infinite majesty and us, very remarkable and very vile sinner, that I am above all men. It has nothing to do with that here, given that it is a very true supposition that no none is made great suddenly, but that time and order are necessarily required for it, as also are the means and manners for attaining to it. Yet it is a great pity to see that man, who ought to have made us of the natural gifts that you give him so as to be able by his grace to know and love you, applies your gifts meanwhile only to himself for the knowledge of visible things that are outside of him, or in himself but outside like the rest of the things, and does not apply them to seeking you alone as his sovereign good and his final object. That is the cause of his misery, of his poverty, nudity, and of his shadows, of his own ignorance, and of his folly, and very often of all wickedness. But leaving aside this confused multitude of men who seem wise in their own eyes, but who are, all the same, in a state of folly and vanity, at least before you, we desire here to envisage only your elect. Since these have been created for you, you have them and rejoice in them, and they in you, in all your eternity. It belongs to you, indeed is infinitely yours, to love them, and to this effect, to pour yourself into them by your infinite benefits and loving gifts, free and agreeable, so that you have in this negotiation of yours, as also do men, beginning, middle, and end. And it is necessary to see, say, and believe that your pleasure is to consume them within the fire of your immense love, and you are at this without ceasing in the as long as this is not achieved, in such a way that within your fire, angels and holy men are consumed to the immense pleasure of your infinite felicity and theirs. And it is in that you take your singular pleasure among men, that you may make them fall in love with you, at the flow and by the flow of your very own love. When this love very actively and vivaciously lights its fire in them, they lose, in it and by it, that which they were and all their habitual corruption, becoming spirit from this loving flow and in it, and one same spirit with it, are made the same spirit and the same love as you, in your spirit, essence, and love. And inasmuch as you see your brides delight in you, so much more do you play in them with pleasure and by pleasant exercises, which the bride herself uses to flow back at the same time into you. And the more you are pleased to do good to her and to enrich her by you manifestations and loving caresses, the more her flow back into you is savory and pleasant to her. Before the abundance of your gifts, she does not want any of these except you, or for your sake, and for herself eternal scorn and confusion of all creatures as of herself. In this regard, I say, these former dissimilarities to you, and even more if she is presently weighed down by any of these, this, I say, afflicts her simply and in the order of your ordered love. For as so very many times you introduced her into your wine cellars, where she drank abundantly and to her heart's content, your delicious must in the ardor of her entire liquefaction, loving and ardent. So have you ordered at the same time your charity in her, between you and her, as well as for her and her neighbor, that is to say for the outside. Thus, my love and my life, and in this she is always satisfied and content, giving herself purely and fully in the ardor of her love for your infinite majesty to doing always with herself and in herself according to your good pleasure. And although it be true that the timing and the results are quite diverse in themselves and in great number, because of your very diverse and very different operations in her, it is all one, and as far as she is concerned it is always so. Given that it is neither your flow nor all that is yours that she wants and craves, but you alone, in your flow and without your flow. Thus, my love, you are her all and her paradise, that she may be truly yours. For in her losses and the abandonments she makes of her whole self in you, she is without herself, without worry or care for herself about this or that, neither about loss nor about any gain or damage that may come to her in all events, whether within or without. Liking better to be tested by you and in you in the ardor of her love, than to know how to explain scientifically and theoretically her loving exercises by science and the mystical way. The explanation and easy expression of this is suitable only to souls greatly advanced in your game and loving spirit, which makes perfection and spirit in them more or less excellently insofar as they are active and importunate toward themselves, so to speak, to love you faithfully, employing themselves for this purpose above their own industry and action, having been made and having become love and spirit in the abundance of your very attractive infusions, very simple, very penetrating of your very own abundance, in the breadth and amplitude of which, as in the totality of yourself, she is made more unworldly, more pure, more simple, more unified than ever in your infinite immensity, in which, above all flow and knowledge, she reposes not in herself, but in you beyond all that you who are her unique object, infinitely beyond all that. In this way the similitudes flowing in the abundance of your divine flow contain, show, and give very savory and very wide spirit and light, not to similar souls, but to those of a lesser capacity and state than themselves. That is admirable. Nonetheless, being, as she is, elevated, fixed, and constituted in supereminence of love and spirit, quite far from all that, she is in her simple vision and constitution firm and fixed quite far above all spirit and inferior state. And nonetheless she does not know, think, or see that, I mean her state, nor her excellence by reflections, but as one unaware and without worry about what she might be. She continues and pursues her path actively and ardently in her way, and everywhere and always in conformity with it. In this way, having become all spirit, she acts and walks in spirit and love, conforming to the degree of the spirit, which, either from the flow or above the flow FO your very own love, dominates her more or less excellently and powerfully, without her being able, in a manner of speaking, to do or live otherwise. So as soon as she is full of your spirit, it is necessary that flesh and corruption be destroyed, I mean their habit. And sometimes the flesh even has qualities of the spirit which dominates her so strongly in certain habits of hers, even in many of them, in such a way that, meanwhile, one may say that the whole man is spirit, though this must be understood sanely and as it should be. And there is no doubt that your pleasure, O my love and my life, is very great to behold in the life of such persons, even to their works and gestures and movements, given that everything about them is so excellently ordered, that it is you who make it all, since and because you have all there is. O happy and 1,000 times happy condition, my love and my life, of the very poor and very vile, earthly creature to be ennobled and constituted to such high dignity of excellence and nobility, to be made the living temple and the very beloved and very cherished bride, even very unique among multiple others, of your infinite majesty, the one who, being God and man in his nature and in his flesh, makes her to be, by virtue of loving him for himself in the totality of himself, by total transformation of herself in his infinite all, both lady and queen in all and over all that which is yours. What enraptures so much these same brides of yours in admiration is that, not knowing what to do nor how to be able to love you sufficiently, they implore in the ardor of their love all the blessed by you and in you, loving spirits as well as holy men, to join their love to her so that there might be in all the heavens and the earth nothing but her love to love you, without, as I said, her knowing what she does nor what she thinks meanwhile, heedless of all but the fire of infinite love which burns her and enkindles her in her infinite delights. In this way, as if drunk and as if crazy, she neither craves nor produces nor grows except in fervor within and without, only in fervor, I say, and often enough in that, and the same is true even for the most spiritual persons, who however have not been enraptured within the furnace of this very consuming fire to that point. For those persons who have been consumed to the last point of their carnal and animal life, and for that matter, of their spiritual life too, they see well, I say, those souls do, that they have in a singular way esteem and reverence, seeing and knowing well by themselves all that has happened in themselves until now and that must happen until its entire accomplishment. But no matter what, oh my love, these are so many deities on earth, unknown by the spiritually mediocre, who because of not being of the same spirit and life as they are and totally reduced, melted, and lost in your immensity, hold them in disgust and quite often in disdain to the point of calumniating them and defaming them by accusing them of vices before their peers, even before the holiest ones. But all that serves only to help them to penetrate better and to lose themselves irretrievably in you, wherein they are totally free and exempt from the attacks of serpentine, enemy tongues of those miserable persons. For them the last and highest term of wisdom is only themselves in themselves, filled, enlaced, and led everywhere like unworthy slaves of their most secret and most hidden internal properties which, crowding them like a mob with their own subtle and diverse inventions, detains them thus miserable captive, serfs of themselves. This will last in many of those persons until the point of death, at which their eyes will possibly be open. But, my love, what are these miserable properties? It is all the effect of self-love and of haughtiness, which, very spiritual and very subtle as these are in them, have all sorts of miserable effects, namely self-determination, self-deception, self-complacency, self-illumination, self-seeking from all sides, all this having neither source nor end, but in self-love and love of oneself, cloaked and covered with a mantle of holiness of pretexts of pleasing you and loving you. And all this meanwhile is but filth, silt, and quite often in a reverse spirit, wherein all these miseries are, and are made to the pleasure of these miserable ones, very subtly and spiritually. They esteem greatly their ways, works, merits, and sentiments, and esteem themselves, humbling themselves through feigned and hypocritical humiliations before creatures whom they know well to be far indeed from believing them to be so humiliated. On the contrary, they must hear, coming from the mouths of others, their own praises, by which they are delighted and tickled with pleasure. Behold what it is, my dear life, to be unfaithful to you, and to want to live only for self and by oneself. Ah, it would have been better for such persons never to have known you beyond what is ordinary to common men, than to turn your divine flow into themselves and into their filth, a thing more damnable within hell, indeed in the inmost depth of all hells. So that one would now know how to speak of it. But it is not so much a question of that for the present as of simply developing, in infinite praise and satisfaction of your majesty, the infinite beauty, luster, splendor, and ornament of your truthful and faithful brides truly constituted and fixed in the totality of yourself, in whom and from whom you take incessantly your singular and infinite pleasure. For if those who find themselves lost in the midst of your infinite essence have arrived at the last point of annihilation, one expresses sincerely what seems to be their present state, not only by the totality of your deity and the nothingness of all that is created, but again by comparing it to the drop of water drawn from a river or from the sea, which, having been spread out, is at once dried up, but this drop not having been spread out after having been drawn, but stirred up, and cast into the totality of its own center, receives the being of its totality into which it is stirred and cast away, without distinction nor difference. It is similarly that same for your brides, all melted and reduced in you, all lost to the point of identification with your infinite totality, very superessential and very unique, wherein and in which, acting, suffering, life, death, are to them one thing in the totality of yourself, in such a way that they are unalterable in your all and totally unknown to the rest of men, as we have said to you. And all their pleasure is, my dear life, that you live in their totality to your infinite pleasure.